Laughter rippled across the glass walls of Westlake International Airport's VIP terminal when a battered old pickup truck rolled onto the private runway. Executives in pressed suits, silk ties, and polished shoes leaned against the tempered windows, smirking, as they saw a tall black man climb out, toolbox in hand. His name was Darius Cole. 38 years old, calloused hands, grease permanently etched under his nails. To them, he looked like nothing more than a roadside mechanic who had taken a wrong turn. Is this the expert they sent for Ms. Cross's jet? Gerald Whitman, director of operations, let the words drip with disdain. I thought we asked for the best, not someone who looks like he changes tires at a gas station. The chuckles behind him grew louder, their voices bouncing like cruel echoes across the glass. But Darius had heard it all before. The looks, the whispers, the snickers. They never saw the truth. 15 years of repairing executive jets awards for technical excellence systems he had designed himself. His resume carried weight, but his skin, his background, always outweighed it in their eyes. He squared his shoulders, swallowed the sting, and walked forward as if their words had never landed. Before I take you deeper into what happened that morning, let me pause, because this isn't just a story about an aircraft repair. This is a story about dignity, justice, and the way truth eventually claws its way out of the shadows. And trust me, you'll want to see how it unfolds. So if you believe in stories that can break your heart and then stitch it back together with hope, hit like right now and subscribe so you don't miss the moments that will make you cry, gasp, and maybe even smile again. Now let's step back onto that runway. The Gulfstream G650 sat gleaming like a $65 million jewel under the pale morning sun, its polished surface reflecting every doubtful face pressed against the glass. The runway supervisor, arms crossed and posture stiff, addressed Darius without a hint of welcome. Miss, Cross's aircraft departs in 2 hours. Our team couldn't diagnose the issue. If you don't fix it within the hour, we'll have to call Atlanta. He kept his distance, as though even standing too close to Darius might tarnish his uniform. Every eye watched as Darius approached the jet. He could feel the weight of their doubt pressing down on him. But then another gaze cut through the crowd, not mocking, not dismissive, intense, calculating, intrigued. Let him work. The voice was sharp enough to slice through the murmurs. A woman stepped onto the tarmac, heels clicking against concrete with commanding rhythm. Isabella Cross, 43, CEO of Cross Aerospace, navy suit tailored to perfection, brown hair catching the light. She didn't spare the executives a glance. Her eyes locked only on Darius. How much time do you need? She asked. That depends on the problem, ma'am. His tone was steady, his gaze unwavering. You have 1 hour, she said, flicking her wrist to glance at a watch worth more than his annual wages. Her lips curved almost imperceptibly. Impress me. The executives retreated into their air-conditioned safety, whispering like children behind glass as Darius crouched by the access panel. The moment he opened it, his stomach tightened. This wasn't a small glitch. The pressurization system had suffered a catastrophic failure, dangerously misdiagnosed as a mere electrical fault. If that jet took off, the cabin would lose pressure at 45,000 feet. Every passenger would be dead within minutes. His pulse quickened, but his hands remained steady. Years of discipline guided his movements with surgical precision. Each twist of a wrench, each adjustment of a valve wasn't just repair, it was triage. He wasn't fixing a machine. He was saving lives. Behind the glass, Isabella stood apart from the others, her eyes never leaving him. There was no contempt in her expression, only something sharper. Recognition, maybe. 30 minutes later, sweat streaked his forehead as he tightened the final bolt. The hiss of stabilized pressure filled the cabin. He closed the panel and wiped his hands on a cloth that had seen more years of work than some of those executives had in their cushioned careers. To him, it was just another job done. To everyone else, it should have been a miracle. But he expected no thanks. Men like him rarely received them. He packed up his tools. Silence lingered until footsteps broke it, measured, deliberate. Isabella emerged again alone this time. Her staff exchanged confused glances, but she ignored them. She stopped in front of him. How long would it have taken them to find the real problem? Her voice was calm, yet razor-edged. They wouldn't have, Darius answered bluntly. The jet would have crashed before they even knew what hit them. A heavy silence swallowed the air. Isabella studied him, eyes narrowed as if she were reading a secret only she could decipher. Then she said the words that made every executive in that glass box stiffen in disbelief. "Come with me." Gasps rippled through the terminal. Gerald Whitman's jaw clenched so tightly it looked ready to snap. He tried to move forward to intervene, but Isabella's hands shot up in a silent command. She didn't break her gaze from Darius. Now what no one on that runway realized was that this moment wasn't just about a repaired jet. It was the first crack in a wall of lies that had stood for years. In the next few hours, truths would surface, truths so heavy they could topple an empire. But for now, all the world saw was a billionaire leading a grease-stained mechanic away from the jet, leaving behind a trail of stunned faces and whispered speculation. Whitman's expression twisted his eyes, following them like daggers. He knew something. He feared something. And as Isabella's voice cut through the noise with one final command, "Me office." Now, Darius realized he had stepped into more than a repair job. He had stepped into a storm. The hallway swallowed them in silence, their footsteps echoing against polished marble. Darius walked a pace behind Isabella, every eye in the terminal burning into his back. He could feel Gerald Whitman's stare, especially sharp, venomous, like a blade pressed to his skin. But Isabella never looked back. She moved with the precision of someone who always knew where she was going. She led him through a restricted corridor and stopped before a set of frosted glass doors. With a quick motion, she pressed her badge. The lock clicked. Inside was a private office, unlike anything Darius had ever seen, sleek, minimal, but radiating power. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the runway. A mahogany desk anchored the room, and subtle lighting gave the space a cold, commanding aura. "Sit," Isabella said, gesturing toward a leather chair. Darius obeyed, though unease coiled in his stomach. Mechanics weren't usually invited into places like this. She sat opposite him, tablet in hand, eyes sharp as scalpels. "Tell me your full name." "Darius Cole," he said evenly. Her fingers danced across the screen. Then she stilled. Her eyes widened, if only for a fraction of a second. She whispered almost to herself, "DC." She looked up at him. "These initials DC, they're engraved on every original design file of our G7 pressurization system. The same system that half my fleet runs on. Are you telling me those letters are yours?" Darius's grip tightened on the armrest. His jaw flexed. He didn't answer right away. "They are your initials, aren't they?" Isabella pressed her voice lower, now dangerous. "Not a coincidence. Not a code. A signature." "Yes," Darius said finally, the word heavy with years of swallowed bitterness. "They're mine." Isabella leaned back, exhaling slowly. 3 patents, 4 awards for innovation, a master's degree in aerospace engineering. And yet, here you are fixing jets like a common mechanic. Why? "Because no one hires a black engineer from the South Side to lead development teams," Darius replied. His voice didn't waver, though inside the weight of the truth crushed him. "Bills still come due missed." "Cross. Mechanics pay them." She stared at him, then pulled open a drawer. Inside was a thick folder. She slid it across the desk. Darius glanced down. Corporate documents, contracts, financial reports, all tied to the G7 system. And every page bore the name Gerald Whitman. "Do you know how much profit that system has brought my company?" she asked, flipping casually through the papers. "Roughly 400 million over 5 years, Darius answered. His tone was blunt, almost defiant. Fuel efficiency up 23%, maintenance costs down 31. Your board loved it. Her eyes flickered with surprise at the precision of his numbers. And Gerald Whitman received 3 promotions and a multi-million-dollar bonus for his work, she said softly. While I kept patching up planes, Darius finished for her, his face unreadable. A sharp knock rattled the door. Without waiting for permission, Gerald Whitman stepped in. His false smile didn't reach his eyes. "Isabella, the board is waiting for your briefing. We also need to discuss." He stopped when he saw Darius. The smile dropped. "What is he still doing here?" "The service is complete, isn't it?" "Actually," Isabella said coolly, "we were discussing intellectual property." Whitman froze. "Intellectual property, yes. The G7 system specifically." Color drained from his face. He forced a laugh. I don't see what a mechanic could possibly contribute to that conversation. Really, Isabella's voice was ice. She turned her tablet so Gerald could see the screen. Because I have here the original G7 design files, and their signed initial DC, which happens to match the man sitting in that chair. Whitman's laugh cracked. He was just an assistant technician. Any contribution he made was minor. Minor, Isabella cut him off, fire flashing in her eyes. Interesting, because I also have emails, Gerald. Emails you sent to HR recommending Darius's dismissal for technical incompetence. 3 days after he submitted the complete G7 design to our system. Darius sat silent, watching Whitman squirm. He remembered that day, vividly, the walk of shame down the hallway, escorted out like a criminal, so the smirks from his colleagues as if his failure confirmed their prejudices. That humiliation had burned into him, shaping every wrench he'd turned since. The knock came again, firm and deliberate. The door opened. A woman in a dark suit entered, carrying a heavy briefcase. She nodded politely at Isabella, then at Darius. "Forgive the delay," she said. "I wanted to double-check the intellectual property files before joining you. Darius, this is Dr. Lillian Park, our chief legal officer," Isabella introduced. Dr. Park set her briefcase down and opened it. "I've reviewed the records. The digital signatures match Mr. Cole's credentials. There's no doubt. The G7 system was authored by him, not Gerald Whitman." Whitman's face went pale. His lips trembled, but no words came out. Isabella leaned forward. Her voice dropped to a razor's edge. "Gerald, you are temporarily relieved of your duties pending an investigation. Hand your badge to security. Now. You can't do this." Whitman stammered, desperation leaking through. "The board will never stand for it. The board," Isabella said coldly, "will be informed in 1 hour. If you want any shred of dignity, walk out that door before I decide to call security." For a moment, Gerald looked ready to explode. His fists clenched, his face flushed red. But finally, with a violent slam of the door, he was gone. Silence hung heavy. Darius felt the weight of 5 years pressing down, memories of being discarded like trash. And now this sudden shift, the truth, clawing its way into daylight. "Mr. Cole," Isabella said, breaking the silence, "Dr. Park has prepared some documents for you. They include recognition of your authorship, financial compensation for royalties owed." She paused, eyes narrowing, voice lowering. "And a proposal." Darius's chest tightened. "What kind of proposal?" "The kind," Isabella said slowly, "that makes history." Her words hovered in the air, like a spark waiting to ignite. The room was silent, but heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Darius sat rigid in the chair, his eyes locked on Isabella, who studied him with unnerving intensity. Across the desk, Dr. Lillian Park quietly unfolded the stack of documents she had brought, the rustle of paper sounding like thunder in the still air. Darius finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "A proposal. After 5 years of silence, after watching someone else rise on my work, you think I'd trust anyone in this company again?" Isabella didn't flinch. "You don't have to trust the company. You only need to trust me." Her words landed like a challenge. Darius almost scoffed, but the steel in her tone made him pause. She slid a folder closer to him. On top was a contract draft. "Retroactive recognition as the rightful author of the G7 pressurization system. Full financial compensation of royalties owed tens of millions at minimum. And a position that should have been yours years ago." Darius raised an eyebrow. "What position?" "Director of Innovation," Isabella replied without hesitation. "The seat Whitman stole from you." Darius let out a short, bitter laugh. "Director of Innovation. Do you really think your board would ever allow a black mechanic from the South Side to hold that title?" His voice cracked slightly, the anger wrapped tight around years of humiliation. "I've spent half a decade patching up other people's messes because your people decided I wasn't fit. You think a fancy title makes that go away?" Isabella leaned forward, her eyes burning. "I don't offer titles as charity, Mr. Cole. I offer them as weapons. And right now, you are the sharpest weapon I have." Her words hung in the air. Dr. Park slid another sheet across the desk, an evidence summary. 7 names were listed, each an employee of Cross Aerospace over the past 10 years. Next to each name was the same story: innovative contributions, patents, drafted designs, submitted, followed by termination letters citing technical incompetence or team disruption. Every name belonged to a Black or Latino engineer. Darius stared at the list, his chest tightening. So I wasn't the only one. No, Isabella said softly. You were simply the one who left the clearest trail. And the one Whitman underestimated most. Images flashed through Darius's mind. The long nights hunched over blueprints, the thrill of solving a system no one else could, and the way Whitman's eyes had glimmered with calculation when he saw the finished design. Then came the humiliation, and the cold escort out of the building, whispers behind his back. The phone calls never returned. He had buried those memories under layers of grease and work, but now they clawed back to the surface, raw and sharp. His hands curled into fists. 5 years, he muttered. 5 years of silence. And now you tell me this was a pattern? Yes, Isabella said. And Whitman is only the beginning. He controls half the board, and he's tied to a network of people who profit off this system of theft and exclusion. But I've been waiting. I've been building my case piece by piece. And you, Mr. Cole, are the key that unlocks it all. Darius looked at her, suspicion flickering in his eyes. Why me? Why not bring this to light yourself? Because it isn't enough for me to accuse him. Isabella replied, The world needs proof, irrefutable proof from the man they tried to erase. Proof that cannot be dismissed as my bias or as politics. You have something no one else does. Tell me I'm wrong. Darius hesitated. His instinct screamed to stay silent, to walk away. But another instinct, the one that had made him record everything back then, was louder. He exhaled slowly. I have the prototype, the original G7 design, dated, digitally signed, and I have recordings. Isabella's eyes widened. Recordings, Darius's lips pressed into a thin line, from 5 years ago. Whitman, in his own words, explaining how to erase my contribution, how to scrub me from the company records, how to discredit me before the board. Word for word. Dr. Park's brows shot up. Do you still have them? Darius nodded once. Backups. Multiple copies. I learned early that people like me don't get second chances, so I made sure I'd always have insurance. For the first time, Isabella's composure cracked. A flicker of something flashed across her face, not just satisfaction, but admiration. She leaned back in her chair, almost smiling. Then it's true. You're not just an engineer. You're a strategist. Before Darius could respond, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. But Isabella's tablet lit up with a security notification. She frowned, tapping the screen. A video feed appeared showing Gerald Whitman in the parking lot, his phone pressed to his ear, his face tight with fury. Who's he calling? Darius asked. Board members, Isabella said, her tone grim. He's trying to get ahead of this. Dr. Park's face hardened. If he convinces them first, they'll close ranks. They'll protect him. We need to move fast. Isabella turned back to Darius. You said you have the prototype and recordings. Can you bring them to me? Darius hesitated. He thought of the hard drive hidden in his apartment, the locked metal case under his bed, the one he hadn't touched in years. The idea of digging it out, reliving that pain, made his chest tighten. But he also thought of his mother scrubbing floors to pay his tuition, and the promise he had made to himself one day the truth would come out. Yes, he said finally, but understand this. I'm not doing it for your company. I'm not doing it to save your shareholders' pride. I'm doing it because I won't let another kid go through what I did. Isabella nodded, her eyes blazing. Then we're aligned, because I don't plan to save this company's pride. I plan to burn down its lies. The words charged the room with electricity. But in the parking lot, Gerald Whitman ended his call and slipped into a black sedan. His lips curled into a thin smile. He had one last card to play. In his briefcase were documents and alliances sharp enough to wound not just Darius, but Isabella herself. And neither of them knew. Someone inside the company was already feeding him information. 2 days later, the top floor of Cross Aerospace headquarters pulsed with tension. The board of directors had gathered in the glass-walled conference room, their faces a mosaic of power, wealth, and suspicion. Outside, reporters buzzed in the lobby, catching wind of rumors about internal conflict. Inside, the stakes couldn't be higher. Darius sat at one end of the long, polished table, feeling the weight of every stare. He wore a plain suit, nothing flashy, but his posture was unyielding. Beside him, Isabella Cross stood tall, a storm behind her calm. Dr. Lillian Park organized a neat stack of folders, her eyes glinting with resolve. At the far end, Gerald Whitman leaned back in his chair, false confidence plastered across his face. He had allies here. Half the board owed him favors, investments, or secrets. He thought today would end with Darius humiliated once again. "Let's get this farce over with," Whitman said smoothly, his voice carrying that polished arrogance the board had long mistaken for leadership. "This so-called mechanic claims he authored one of our flagship systems. Preposterous. My team developed the G7 system. Everyone here knows it." A low murmur rippled through the room. Several directors nodded, others frowned, waiting for the drama to unfold. Isabella raised her hand. The room fell silent. "Mr. Whitman, you may find today's evidence inconvenient, but we will not ignore it." She gestured toward Darius. "Mr. Cole, would you share your proof?" Darius stood. His throat tightened, but his voice was clear. 5 years ago, I was a junior engineer here. I solved the pressurization problem your teams couldn't crack. I designed the system that became the G7. And 3 days after submitting the complete project, I was fired for technical incompetence. Snickers rose from Whitman's side of the table. Darius didn't flinch. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick binder. He slid it across the table. Inside were blueprints, schematics, calculations, all dated, all digitally signed. And in the corner of every page, bold and unmistakable, were the initials DC. "This is the original prototype," Darius said. "My work, my name." Whitman smirked. "Initials. Anyone could scribble 2 letters on a page. That proves nothing." Dr. Park's voice cut through like steel. "The metadata proves otherwise. These files were created under Mr. Cole's credentials logged into the company system. The digital signature is indisputable." Whitman shifted but recovered quickly. Even if that were true, he was an assistant. He contributed minor details. "The system was my creation." "Is that so?" Isabella's tone was sharp. She tapped a button on the console. The speakers crackled. A recording began to play. Whitman's voice filled the room, oily and smug. "We need to erase Cole's files. Clean his name from the system. No one will believe a black mechanic from the South Side designed this. Our clients expect sophistication, not street scraps. Take ownership of the system. Eliminate any trace." The words hung in the air like a blade. For a moment, silence reigned. Then the board erupted, gasps, whispers, outrage. Whitman's face turned ashen. That's fabricated. Spliced together." "Really?" Isabella snapped. "Because this isn't the only recording. Mr. Cole kept copies, multiple backups. Our forensic team has already verified authenticity. Would you like to hear more?" Another clip played. "Get rid of him. Fire him for incompetence. By the time anyone asks questions, the system will be on the market under my name." This time, no one spoke. The directors stared at Whitman as though seeing him for the first time. His carefully polished facade was crumbling, sweat beading at his temples. Darius's chest tightened. Hearing those words again reopened old wounds. He remembered the humiliation, the way security had marched him out, while Whitman smirked from his office window. But now those same words were his weapon. "This isn't just about me." Darius said, his voice trembling with restrained fury. He held up the list. Isabella had given him the 7 names. 7 other engineers, all brilliant, all silenced, fired under the same excuses. Their ideas stolen, their futures destroyed. How many more never spoke up? The boardroom shifted uneasily. Faces turned away, some pale, some hardened with guilt. Whitman slammed his hand on the table. "This is an ambush. You're making a spectacle to destroy me. Do you think shareholders will tolerate this circus?" "They'll tolerate truth," Isabella shot back. "And if they don't, then they'll watch this company collapse under lawsuits and public outrage. Because make no mistake, this evidence won't stay in this room." "Durastor?" Park slid another folder across the table. "We have enough to file immediate charges of intellectual property theft, discrimination, and fraud." If the board refuses to act, the courts will. Whitman's eyes darted around, searching for allies. But the room had changed. Those who once nodded at his words now avoided his gaze. His empire was slipping through his fingers. "Don't be naive," he hissed at Isabella. "You think ousting me will save this company? You have no idea the mess you're walking into." Isabella leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "Then enlighten us." Whitman's lips curled into a twisted smile. "Fine. You want truth? Here it is. I'm not the only one. Half this board has benefited from the same game, burying innovations, silencing inconvenient voices, pocketing the profits. You expose me, you expose them all. And they'll burn this company to the ground before they let you." The boardroom froze. Some faces went white. Others narrowed their eyes, realizing Whitman had just dragged them into the light with him. Darius felt the air crackle. This was bigger than he imagined. Not just one thief, but a network. And now Isabella stood against all of them. Whitman leaned back, smugness returning. "So go ahead. Play your recordings. Tell your sob story. But if I fall, I won't fall alone." The tension in the room snapped like a live wire. The boardroom was no longer just a stage for corporate politics. It was a battlefield. And somewhere in that battlefield, Darius realized there might be traitors who would do anything to keep their secrets buried. The door suddenly burst open. A security officer stepped in, breathless. "Miss Cross, we have a problem. Sensitive files have been leaked online. Confidential designs. The source, someone inside this room." Gasps erupted. Isabella's eyes darted across the table, scanning every face. Whitman's smile widened, triumphant. And Darius knew in that instant that the real war had only just begun. The boardroom was chaos. Directors shouted over each other, voices cracking with panic as the news sank in. Confidential files, designs worth billions, had just been leaked to the public. The company's iron shield of secrecy had shattered. And someone inside this very room had swung the hammer. Isabella raised a hand, commanding silence. "Who authorized access?" she demanded, her voice slicing through the uproar. The security officer swallowed. The breach originated from a device logged in under board credentials. It happened less than 10 minutes ago. The files are everywhere. Media outlets, forums, investors' inboxes. "We can't contain it." Gerald Whitman smirked, reclining in his chair, as if he had already won. "What did I tell you? Burn it all down. If I go down, so does everyone else." Darius's gut twisted. For years, Whitman had robbed him of his voice. And now, even cornered, he tried to drag everyone into the abyss. But Darius wasn't the same man who had been escorted out 5 years ago. He had come prepared. "Play the rest of it," Darius said quietly. Isabella hesitated, then nodded. He tapped his laptop and the speakers crackled again. Whitman's voice filled the air a second time, angrier, unguarded. "If anyone ever questions the G7, erase Cole's name. Erase anyone else like him. They don't belong in this industry. Our clients trust us, not them. Keep the records clean. If I have to torch the whole company to keep control, I will." The boardroom fell into stunned silence. Whitman's smirk faltered. "This isn't just theft, Doctor." Park said, her voice sharp with disgust. "This is systemic discrimination, willful fraud, and now sabotage." She turned to the directors. "If you stay silent, you are complicit." One of the older directors, a man who had sat stiff and silent until now, slammed his palm on the table. "Enough. I won't be dragged down with him." He turned to Isabella. "Cross, you have my vote. Remove him." Another voice followed. Then another. The tide shifted slowly at first, then with force. The faces that had once been Whitman's allies hardened their loyalties, fracturing in the light of undeniable proof. Whitman's composure cracked. He stood shouting, "You're fools. Do you know what happens when this evidence goes public? Stock prices will collapse. Clients will flee. You'll lose everything." "No," Isabella said firmly. She stepped closer, her heels clicking like gavel strikes on marble. "We won't lose everything. We'll lose the rot that's been poisoning us for years." She pointed directly at him, "Starting with you." Security entered the room. Whitman's face contorted fury, replacing fear. "You'll regret this, Isabella. And you." He pointed a trembling finger at Darius. "You'll crawl back to your garage when this empire burns." Darius rose slowly. His voice calm and unshakable cut through Whitman's rage. I've already crawled, Whitman. I've already been broken. But I built something you'll never understand, resilience. And today I don't crawl, I stand. For the first time, Whitman had no reply. Security flanked him, gripping his arms. He struggled, shouting curses, but the sound grew faint as the doors slammed behind him. Silence lingered heavy and cleansing. The storm had broken. Hours later, the press conference unfolded before a sea of cameras. Isabella stood at the podium, her voice steady, announcing sweeping reforms, a full investigation into past intellectual property thefts, restitution for wronged engineers, and the creation of a new innovation fund for marginalized communities. But the moment that stole the breath of everyone in the room came when she gestured to the man standing at her side. "This is Darius Cole," she declared, "the true architect of the G7 system. The man whose brilliance was stolen, silenced, and hidden. That ends today. From this moment forward, he will serve as our director of innovation and, more importantly, as a partner in reshaping the future of Cross Aerospace." The flash of cameras blinded, the roar of reporters filled the hall. Darius stood straight, his face calm, but inside he felt something deeper than triumph, vindication. Weeks turned into months. The company transformed. For the first time, the executive floor reflected the diversity of the engineers who built its foundation. Programs were launched to nurture young talent from underrepresented backgrounds. Old barriers crumbled, and in the heart of the city, far from corporate glass towers, a new building rose, a community technology center, funded by Cross Aerospace, but directed by Darius himself. On opening day, teenagers crowded around workbenches, soldering wires, sketching designs, their laughter and curiosity filling the air. Darius walked among them, offering guidance, his eyes soft with pride. At the ceremony, Isabella stood beside him. But this time, she wasn't the commanding CEO. She was simply an ally, applauding as Darius cut the ribbon. In the front row sat his mother, hair now silver, eyes shimmering with tears. She had scrubbed floors for decades so he could chase an education. Today, she watched her son not only claim his place, but open doors for others. When Darius spoke, his voice carried across the crowd, steady and resonant. Real change doesn't happen when one person breaks through. It happens when we tear down the walls so no one else has to climb them. Success isn't revenge. It's visibility. It's giving the next generation the chances we were denied. The crowd erupted in applause. Reporters scribbled furiously. Young faces lit up with hope. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the city lights began to flicker, Darius stood alone for a moment, watching students hunched over prototypes. He thought of the scars, years of ridicule, the humiliation of being erased, the nights questioning if he was enough. The pain hadn't vanished, but it had been transformed. He smiled faintly. The best response to prejudice had never been individual glory. It was building bridges so others could cross without fear. And in that moment, surrounded by laughter and possibility, Darius Cole finally felt what Whitman never could: freedom.